Augusto Céspedes. The well. When the main objective is to quench thirst. Some pages taken from the Bolivian NCO Miguel Navajo's diary show the tragic reality of a group of Bolivian soldiers during the Chaco War. Reading these pages, we get to know the events that happened during the excavation of a dry well and the combat that takes place in order to claim it. After reading the well, we find that we have faced a masterpiece which shows the most absurd side of a useless war. By Fernando Chelle. About 4 months ago, I published a study on Augusto Céspedes' The Excavation, included in the short story collection Thunder Among the Leaves, 1953. In that short story, the Paraguayan Cervantes Prize winner tells the story of the prisoner Perucho Rodi, a Chaco War former fighter, whom is jailed in miserable conditions in Paraguay. Even though the excavation is about Rodi's struggle for freedom and the war is just a background, for it is only present in Rodi's hallucinations. Out there, in Gondra's front, he had excavated 80 meters from their trench to the back of the Bolivian rear, a successful strategy that took the Bolivians by surprise. But I will not analyze this short story again. My intention is just to use it as a reference because the story I will analyze has the same background, but it is approached from the Bolivian side. The author I chose for this study is Augusto Céspedes, Cochabamba, Bolivia. February 6, 1904, La Paz, Bolivia. May 9, 1997. I will analyze his short story The Well, which belongs to his book Sangre de Mestizos, published in Santiago de Chile in 1936 by Ediciones Ursula. Both the book and the short story are considered ultimate jewels of the post-war literature by the aforementioned Augusto Céspedes. Sangre de Mestizos is Céspedes' first book. It was published immediately after the Chaco War was over. It is considered by most critics one of the best short story collections in Bolivian literature. We can say that Céspedes, who had an active role in that war, as a journalist for El Universal at first, 1933 to 1944, and later as soldier, 1934 to 1935, wrote all of these stories during the war, from the rearguard or from the battlefront. It can be considered a cornerstone of the literature regarding to Chaco War, a recurrent topic among Bolivian and Paraguayan writers. The work consists of 9 stories, in which a mestizo character always narrates in detail the reality of war. In these war and life stories, Céspedes shows the tragedies of war, the military tactics, and the weaknesses of the soldiers. He also makes social criticism and sometimes, even poetry. Even though in the first lines of this article I referred to Céspedes' story in order to show the other side of the coin, in Céspedes' story the reader will find a deeper look into that absurd war between Paraguay and Bolivia. In the Bolivian's book, and in the particular short story, we meet an inhospitable land, with a warm and dry weather, deserted, covered exclusively by autochthonous trees, a place where there was no water and therefore the access to wells and lakes became an important part of the military strategy. The lack of a water source will be the backbone of the story that I will analyze, and it is mentioned by Eduardo Galeano in Memoria del Fuego, Memory of Fire, where he explains that the lack of water was precisely the soldiers' cause of death. Bolivia and Paraguay are at war. The poorest countries in South America, the ones that do not have access to the sea, those who have lost the most are killing each other for a piece of a map. Hidden beneath the creases of both flags, the Standard Oil Company and the Royal Dutch Shell are disputing over a probable oil of the Chaco. Stuck at war, both Bolivians and Paraguayans have the duty of hating each other in the name of a land that they do not love, that nobody loves. The Chaco is a grey desert, inhabited by spines and snakes, with no singing birds nor a single person's footprint. Everything is thirsty in this spooky land. The butterflies crowd in desperation around the few drops of water. Bolivians have come from a freezer to an oven, they have been taken from the Andean peaks and thrown to these burnt bushes. Here they are dying because of the bullets, but many more are dying of thirst. The well. Narrative structure. The text is divided in 3 parts, the second and the third part are led by a Roman number, but the first part, I do not know why, is not. I do not know if it was Céspedes' decision not to number it, but the sure thing is it does not have a number. In its first part, Bolivian NCO Miguel Navajo is explaining his current situation and his decision of letting us know the story of a well. He chooses some excerpts of his personal diary that show the lives of some selfless sappers amidst an inhospitable waterless place, where they are threatened by the sun and dust. The first part of the story ends when they find a well, the main element of the second part. The second part of the story is the longest one. It starts on March 2nd. In this part we get to know about a group of Bolivian soldiers that have found a sterile well, from which they vainly try to drag some water, and we witness their hope and further misery. The third and last part of the story, which just quotes the date, December 7th, tells the bloody and unhappy ending of the defense of that well, useless like Chaco War itself. Plot. The story reproduces some pages from Bolivian NCO Miguel Navajo's diary. In the beginning of the story, Navajo is the narrator of his current status. He says that he has been suffering of beriberi. He says he is a patient in the Tereri hospital, and he also informs that he was in the military campaign for 2.5 years. He clarifies that, despite being sick and having been shot in his ribs last year, he is still captive and unable to go back to La Paz. As he gets bored in the hospital, he reads his diary and decides to show us some of its excerpts. From now on, the style of the narration will change. In the second part, the narrator tells about the excavation of a well around 1933. The characters, including the narrator NCO, are part of the Army's sapping line, which clear the roads for building bridges or digging ditches. So, the story does not make a clear reference to the enemy or the battles in this war, for thirst is the real enemy of these men. After receiving the order of digging a well from a man described as blonde and short, the soldiers find an old and not deep hole, a hole that no one knows who dug and abandoned it. Then, the soldiers decided to keep digging that hole hoping to find some water, but the hole just keeps going deeper and deeper. For a moment, the soldiers feel hopeful because they found mud, but it happens to be just a layer of wet clay. As they go deeper, they only find dry soil. 20, 30, and 40 meters deep, they still cannot find the well, and the search for water becomes the real war, and it gets more real than the war being held on the surface. As they go deeper and deeper, the soldiers lose their notion of time. They just survive their thirst in perpetual darkness and begin to rave and faint because of the asphyxia. In a certain moment, the Paraguayans find out that the Bolivians have a well, but they are unaware it is a dry one. The Bolivian soldiers defend the well as if they were protecting something precious, as if it weren't a sterile well. The battle for the empty well lasts 5 hours and the death toll is 13 soldiers, counting both sides. This useless battle for a useless well might work as a great metaphor for the absurdity of that war. The dry and sterile land ends up swallowing the soldiers' lives. A brief final commentary. Undoubtedly, Céspedes' purpose in this story was to show how useless and pointless the Chaco Wars were. That dry well, which was only useful for burying both sides' soldiers, is a great symbol of that futility. The battle for that sterile well was not motivated for the will of getting some territory or the defense of an ideology. It was motivated by thirst, the survival instinct, and also the stupidity of some and the ignorance of the others.